Simon, thank you very much for having me in the lesson. I really appreciated that.
Thank you.
I admire the fact that you started with an assessed weakness. It was quite clear. You made it evident in your planning. This they'd done. This they'd done. This they couldn't do.
Yeah.
Okay. So they began with that. That was the whole focus of your lesson.
Yeah.
What proportion of the students by the end had addressed that particular weakness?
I think a majority of the students could actually be able to indicate which angles were the same, but I don't think they'd be able to, I think only a minority will be able to use the correct terminology for it, which is something I will need to address in a future lesson.
I think that sums up perfectly where I was with an understanding of how those students did during that lesson. I think what we can do is just tease out why that happened.
Yeah.
Tell me first, what worked well to enable them to get where you wanted them to get?
I think initially using just the quite clear and straightforward rules of this is what this is what this is, particularly when we're looking at all acute angles are equal, all obtuse angles are equal. I think that worked quite well with the group because they could easily spot that.
Yes.
I also think getting them to practice those skills without any of the cumbersome terminology was quite good for them because they could easily do that with just what I'd given them. Yeah. I think also using the vote pads gave me an idea of how well the pupils were doing at that point as well.
Yes. So they were giving you immediate feedback on that.
Yeah.
You used the pads at the end.
Yeah.
What did that feedback give you?
I don't think I was able to analyse that data in enough detail, to be honest. It was apparent to me just by looking at how many X's were coming up from during the session that quite a few of them weren't understanding the terminology as well as I'd hoped at that point.
Yeah.
So that is why I stopped it early and tried to go through the worked example with them so they could see the terminology in action. That was more beneficial, I think, than using the quiz that I'd hoped to do.
Yes, yes. I think that was a wise move.
Yeah.
Because they quite clearly hadn't grasped those key elements, had they? I agree with you about the strengths there. They had got the practical understanding of where the angles were, and they'd started to use that terminology. Yeah. The problem did come at times with the application of that knowledge, didn't it?
Yeah, it did, yeah.
Moving them forward with that. Let's switch to the other side of the language and why that didn't quite go as you wanted. What didn't work as well as you'd hoped?
Well, I gave them the missing words bit to fill in. Yes. And I think they didn't get enough from that, and I think maybe the problem was I was doing 3 in one with tried to do 3 things in one go.
Just explain that to me.
Well, we did the alternate, corresponding and consecutive angles all in one go and did all the definitions all in one go. Yeah. And I don't think the pupils had enough time to practice, say, just doing alternate or corresponding after we'd done each one. Right. I think that's where that was a weakness with that bit.
So they were given too much
much information,
and all at once.
Yeah, and not enough time to practice it.
Okie dokie. And in terms of use of the terms, corresponding and so on, do you think they grasp what those what those terms were clearly?
Probably not. I think that, like I said right at the beginning, I think there's more time needed to practice those using that skills. I think looking at the time frame, it came too later on in the lesson possibly to allow that practice.
Yes. And I would agree entirely with you. Yeah. More time to consolidate their learning and to explore their learning. We'll come back to those who knew it and got it in a moment. But I think the similar thing happened with your assessment. Yeah. The assessment was clear, it was loud and clear. What did we learn from the assessment is the next stage on. Where you did explore somewhat where there were very mixed approaches, where they hadn't grasped it. Yeah. But there wasn't sufficient learning from the assessment.
Yeah.
Good assessment tool, good points at assessment, but they weren't learning enough to then move on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then let's look at the ability of the group. Just tell me about the most able in the group. Did they get what they needed in that particular lesson? Because there were some who really got it.
Some did really get it.
Yeah.
I don't think the most able in the group quite came away with what I'd expect from the most able in that group. I don't think they came away with sufficient knowledge to be able to use the terminology with confidence.
Right. Why is that?
Probably the pace of the lesson was one hindering factor. I don't think they were able to, there was maybe not enough time spent on that, so because I was a bit too slow at the beginning.
Okay.
But also there wasn't the tools there for them to go away independently and do that as well,
Okay.
which could be another aspect I could look at.
So if you'd differentiated more and focused on the most able at times, they could then have taken material away, worked independently, and perhaps pushed on a bit further with it.
Yes.
And you could have then focused with those lower attainers rather than, or those who simply hadn't got it. They might not be a low attainer, but they just hadn't clicked with that.
Yeah.
Could you have divided up the class once you realised where they were? Could you have done anything other than just leave them to work at it all together?
Well, there's the space in that room to do small consolidation work with a small group, so take an extraction group out. And I had actually planned for that at one point in the lesson, but I felt at the point where I decided to whether to go ahead with it or not, that a majority of the group were on side and could actually do it. That was right early on in the lesson though, which they were quite confident with.
Yes. So, but at the later stage, you didn't feel you could then change the plan or adapt it? I
think I felt that I couldn't adapt it sufficiently in the given time, I think was what I felt at the time.
Yeah. But I agree with you that there were those who didn't understand enough and therefore you couldn't get the learning focused enough for them.
Yeah.
And there were those at the upper end who might have known this and got it, but needed more independent work to go and consolidate that. Your use of assessment, just let me go back to that assessment at the end. What happens to the assessment that's up on the screen? All that good information about what they knew and didn't know, what happens to that? It's all electronic, clearly.
Yeah, it is. Well, I just do a quick visual look at it. So I literally just quick glance at see what's happening. Yeah. So with the early examples, with the bar charts that were coming up, it was just a quick look at it to see. Majority have got it right, which is why it was in a different colour.
Yes.
Where I could pick up on some of the misconceptions, and which is why I went on to do some follow-up questions to that.
Right.
Whereas the later on example, which is where they were doing the independent work, the feedback from that was pretty visual to me. I was just looking at it, and just assessing it to me, that a majority hadn't got that.
Yes. It's pretty impressionistic though.
Yeah.
Is it good enough as a record of where they got to?
But I don't think so, no. Okay. I could have saved that information and used it later on, but the way I did it, I didn't. It wasn't good enough.
Okay. The lesson was a satisfactory lesson. Students made satisfactory progress, and the learning was satisfactory. They worked hard at what you wanted them to do. Yeah. There was insufficient challenge for some, and the steps were too big for others. The learning wasn't consolidated for them. Yeah. I agree entirely with where you put the strengths and the improvement areas. Yeah. I wish you well as you work with that group to really consolidate it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me in there. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.